According to this little stack here, I read 6 books this month. 6. 2 manga. Doesn't seem like a lot. Oh well. That's what I read. I've talked about most of the books that I read this month in some capacity, so I'm going to jump into a book that I haven't mentioned at all yet. I just got through reading this book a few days ago. This is My Annihilation. Now, one of my favourite bands in the whole wide world is Every Time I Die, rest in peace, they just broke up. They had a new album out last year, and in one of the songs, the phrase My Annihilation gets repeated over and over in the chorus, and so every time I picked up this book, I had that song stuck in my head. Anyway, this is My Annihilation by Fuminori Nakamura, and it is a crime novel, a murder mystery novel, a psychological horror suspense thriller novel. It's really gritty and nasty, and it's also the first Nakamura novel I have ever read. He's written a whole bunch of stuff, and this is translated by Sam Bett of Sam Bett and David Boyd, who handle all of the translation of Mieko Kawakami's novels. So I was excited for this, because Sam Bett is such a great translator. And also, I really like Japanese murder mysteries. I've made a whole video on Japanese murder mysteries. There's a lot that I really like, but this isn't really that. This is more of a modern, gritty, nasty crime drama. At times it reminded me of Natsuo Kirino's Out, which is a favourite of mine, even though it's a very difficult book in terms of its subject matter and its events and the treatment of its characters. My Annihilation tells the story of God knows what. It starts with a guy in a cabin, and he's got in front of him identification of another man. He's looking through notes, he's got a briefcase, he's got a stack of journal notes, and he's reading through them, and it is his intention to steal the identity of this man. You don't know why, you don't know who our protagonist is, and you spend most of the first act just reading that journal, which tells the story of this man whose identity he's going to steal. And in this journal it documents how, as a kid, he was pretty psychopathic, and he took his sister out into the woods and pushed her off a cliff. But she didn't die. And then we learn a little bit more about his story, and then we learn more about our protagonist, kind of, as he is taken out of the cabin and put somewhere else by someone else, and then weird stuff starts to unfold. This is a novel about identity, about human psychology, about manipulation, about the truth of who we are and what makes us what we are. And it's a book that over and over again twists what you think you know and your preconceived notions of who is who and what they're doing and why. It's a dizzying novel, and I'm sure it was a real pain to translate. It's written in a lot of different forms. Sometimes it's first person, sometimes it's third person, sometimes it's epistolary with journal entries and diaries and even notes from psychiatrists and doctors. And it's really gritty and nasty, and it's full of a lot of horrible things. There's abuse in here, there is murder or attempted murder. It's not nice, and it is really dizzying. I literally got dizzy reading it, trying to keep track of who is who, and who is actually not who you think they are, etc. There's a lot going on, and overall, I don't even know how I feel about it. By the way, if you can hear loads of sounds outside, it's because I got the window open because I'm really hot. It's a trippy novel, it's a difficult novel to talk about. I enjoyed my time with it, and I kind of enjoyed being confused and overwhelmed by it. I just don't know if it's actually good. My last video was a review of Paradise by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes, a Mexican novel, the second novel by her that I've read after hurricane season, which was a favourite of mine about 2 years ago, and it was a really difficult book to review. These are not nice books, they're not books filled with nice characters. Nothing about these books is pleasant or redeemable. They are books that show, I wouldn't even say the darkest side of masculinity or humanity. I would just say a side that we're all aware of, but in really, really gritty detail with a spotlight shone on it. It's not nice. Paradise tells the story of 2 teenage boys, one very rich, one very poor. They are friends, and it's set on an estate called Paradise, a very luxury housing estate where the rich boy lives and the poor boy works, and they get drunk together, and the rich boy really wants to sleep with his neighbour, and she's this unassuming middle-aged woman that he's got his eye on, and the poor boy just sits and listens and drinks himself into oblivion. It's really, really dark, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for its writing, for Hughes's translation. I enjoyed it for just how much it exposes the nastiness of young masculine aggression. And it has a lot to say about class disparity and how our worlds that we're born into, our society, our family, our class, everything pretty much nurtures us into the people that we are, and often the people that we are not good in any way. And is it our fault? I think that's kind of the big takeaway from this book, but that doesn't make it a pleasant reading experience. A far more pleasant reading experience was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is a fantasy/urban fantasy/YA author that I really, really like. I loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I enjoyed The Near Witch, and I enjoyed this. It's not perfect, but I love Gothic fiction, and this is kind of YA, my first Gothic novel. It has a great sense of place, it explores mirror worlds, and apparently, according to one of my commenters, V.E. Schwab literally called this Crimson Peak meets The Secret Garden. That's exactly what I said in a video where I talked about this. It is Crimson Peak. If you like that film, that Del Toro film, you'll enjoy this. It has Crimson Peak-esque-ness about it. And I haven't read The Secret Garden, but I don't know, it's probably like that. It tells the story of a young girl who grows up in an orphanage, and she has this diary from her mum who tells her never to go to Gallant, like in Crimson Peak. And then she does go to Gallant because her uncle lives there and says, come here, you have family here, we'll take care of you. Then she gets there, turns out her uncle's actually dead, and all that's left is her cousin, who says, get out, you shouldn't be here, it's not a safe place to live. People who live here have to sacrifice their lives to live here, and it's cursed and whatever, and then you learn why. And it's a YA Gothic pseudo-adventure story. It has a lot of YA tropes, it's very simple to read, but it's a fun and enjoyable and very quick little Gothic novel. I made a dedicated video about Milkfed a few weeks ago, days ago, who knows. I love Melissa Broder, I adore The Pisces, her first novel, it is one of my favourite novels, and then I finally read Milkfed. Milkfed is very much like The Pisces. Both of these are novels about young, broken women, what we sometimes call disaster women. In The Pisces... Snowy! In The Pisces, our protagonist is pretty selfish. She is almost narcissistic. She definitely doesn't care about other people. Hi, Snowy. As much as she cares about herself. And in Milkfed, our protagonist is different. She has mother issues. She's a young woman who has suffered eating disorders, and now she's emotionally attached herself to another young woman whom she has formed a romantic bond with, who is kind of everything that she wants to be, or could be, or projects herself to be, possibly. Our protagonist is Jewish, but lapsed. She is very, very skinny and obsessed with her diet, but the woman she's become obsessed with is a very dedicated Orthodox Jewish person who is fat and enjoys food. So they are very much tied together, and our protagonist obsesses over this girl. And it's a book about obsession, about food, about sex, about love, about attention and camaraderie and loneliness, a lot of things. And I really, really, really enjoyed it. I preferred The Pisces, and I talked a lot about why in that video, but I just love Melissa Broder's writing. I love her female protagonists. I love how damaged they are, and I can't wait to read whatever she brings out next. Another book that I did a dedicated review of is a book that is brand new out this month in March 2022, The Deloread by Missouri Williams. This is one hell of a book. It is a post-apocalyptic, pseudo-gothic narrative about a family born of incest, and they are, as far as they know, the only people left alive after this strange environmental apocalypse. They live in Prague, I think it's Prague, and they just sit around and watch videos about this Saved by the Bell-esque California school, and they learn lessons, and they worship their mother, the matriarch, who kind of tells them stories and dictates how they should live and has created a narrative for them to live by. But our protagonist, Dolores of the Deloread, is the youngest. She is mute, she is legless and very overweight, and there's a lot of gratuitous description of fat people, which didn't sit very well with me. But Dolores is being married off to another group that the mother has had a vision may exist somewhere out there beyond the city. So they wheel Dolores out at the beginning of the book to get married, and then she comes crawling back on her belly through the forest, and you don't know what happened or why she's back, and you just kind of spend a lot of time with the family and how eventually the stitches that keep them all together start to get pulled apart and unraveled. It's very Shakespearean. It's very Cormac McCarthy. It's very bleak and horrible. It sometimes just feels like a family drama. Other times it just feels horrid, which family dramas often are. I think describing it as the darkest Shakespearean narratives like Titus Andronicus with the darkest stories of Cormac McCarthy, like The Road or Child of God, is pretty accurate. That's what you're getting here. If you like Cormac McCarthy and Shakespeare, especially his darker tragedies, you're going to enjoy the Deloread. And finally, at least in terms of books, this is so far my favourite novel of 2022, Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. The other day, I was lucky enough to go to the Common Press in Shoreditch in London to go see a chat between Julia Armfield and the author of Tell Me I'm Worthless, one of my favourite novels ever, my favourite novel of 2021, Alison Rumfitt. The two of them sat down and were interviewed by Rivers Solomon, another wonderful author, and the three of them chatted about Gothic literature. They talked about queerness, they talked about their novels, they talked about the publishing industry, blah, blah, blah. And I was sat front row, staring the whole time, just watching these two incredible authors who are clearly friends with each other, just chat and banter and talk about horror films and Gothic literature, and I got to ask a question, and it was also lovely. I'm supposed to talk about the book, aren't I? It's really good. So, Our Wives Under the Sea. It tells the story of a lesbian couple. It's a dual narrative, you get both of their perspectives. Mostly it's the wife who is now trying to keep what's left of her wife alive. Leah went under the sea in a submarine on some investigation for some company. It's never really made clear, but she and her crew got stuck at the bottom of the ocean for 6 months. Hello, Thnoe. Now she's back, and she's broken, and she's damaged, and she's doing weird things, and she can barely speak. And Miri, her wife, is trying to sort of fix things, but she doesn't know how, and she's sort of grieving for the loss of her former relationship. She's grieving for her wife who is dead but not dead. She's still here, but she's not herself. It's very, very gothic. It's pseudo-horror, pseudo-science fiction, and I loved it to pieces. And God, that talk was amazing. I also read 2 manga. Mashal, which is a fun spin on the Harry Potter formula with no transphobia. And it's a really good new shonen manga. I think I might do a full video on it, so I'll leave talking about it until I've read more Mashal, but I've never said it out loud before. Mashal's a really fun thing to say. And the other manga that I read was Mieruko-chan, which is a very, very clever comedy horror blend. I've written a full article about why Mieruko-chan is such a good manga. I'm going to link that article in the description for you to read, and then I think I'll turn that article into a full video soon, but it's an incredible, incredible piece of horror manga. Look out for that video. I'll leave it there. It was a good month. Subscribe for books.